Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. We are talking Russia again as now the negotiations move back to Moscow, where President Putin has said he will be receiving Steve Witkoff and delegation. I think the important thing for everyone to understand here is that, first of all, President Trump is, of course, looking to end the war irrespective of the consequences for the Ukrainians or the Russians. That is overwhelmingly his top priority right now. He has made that clear for the entirety of this second term of his presidency. He's annoyed that it hasn't happened. And if you want to end the war, and the consequences don't really matter to you, the conditions, the outcomes, and you're not really focused on the details, then the easiest thing to do is put enormous pressure on the weaker party. And the weaker party is, of course, overwhelmingly Ukraine, not only because they have the smaller economy and the smaller fighting force, but also particularly because they're caught up in a significant corruption scandal, which is real and which has just taken the scalp of Andriy Yermak, who was the chief of staff and was critically important, not just for domestic political stability and wrangling factions, but also in terms of negotiations. So Trump and his team understand that Zelensky is in a weaker position now, and so pressing the Ukrainians harder is more likely to lead to an outcome than pressing the Russians harder, and that's what they're all about. Now, this incenses the Europeans, who are providing immense amounts of support for Ukraine now. I mean, overwhelmingly, the money that Ukraine is getting internationally is coming from Europe, and virtually none is coming at this point from American taxpayers, which is important for Americans to realize because it gives the Europeans a lot more influence. But it's not what's motivating President Trump and Steve Witkoff, who is there to get Trump the outcome that Trump wants, which is end the war. Now, Russia, knowing that they are in a much stronger position now, is not trying to put forward a deal that the Ukrainians might accept, not at all. What they're trying to do is put forward a deal that they know that the Ukrainians will reject, but that will put them in better stead with the Trump administration, and particularly with those in the Trump administration that are engaging more directly with the Russians. And here we're talking primarily about Witkoff and also J.D. Vance and his advisors, much more so than Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And so the point is, if you're Russia, you're not trying to come to the table. You're not trying to get the Ukrainians to yes. You believe that you can get a much better position by continuing to fight. But you are interested in showing the Americans that you're willing to engage. What you want is enough engagement from the United States, enough support from Trump and those around him that they blame the Ukrainians for not accepting Russia's maximalist terms, and that maybe even a small number of Europeans start peeling off, as we've seen increasingly clearly from Hungary's Viktor Orban, for example, and join Trump's position. Because at that point, not only do the Russians have greater impunity in the attacks that they are engaging in without worrying about American blowback, but they're also starting to divide and weaken NATO, the transatlantic alliance, which is, of course, the ultimate win here. And the fact that Trump is so uniquely focused on just wanting to end the war irrespective of the outcomes for Ukraine or for the Europeans is the biggest advantage at this point that Putin has to play over the coming months. And indeed, that is what he's doing. Unfortunately, first of all, I don't believe the Ukrainians are in a position that they could accept even a watered down deal if Rubio were able to get the Russians there, and I don't think he is, because there'd be wild opposition to that among the Ukrainian people themselves. Most Ukrainians want an end to the war, but they want an end to the war on Ukrainian terms. They reject an end to the war on Russian terms. And that would undermine Zelensky greatly. In fact, he's in a weaker position to offer such terms precisely because of the corruption scandal that has brought down Yermak. He can't provide support for an outcome that his own people aren't going to get behind, and indeed are continuing to fight to oppose. And so what that means is that the Ukrainians continue to fight. They don't accept Russia's terms. Neither do the Europeans. The Europeans either find a way to force the Belgians into accepting a seizure of Russian assets, which allows the financing of Ukraine to continue to fight the war for another 2 to 3 years. And I'm not convinced that Ukraine's capable of fighting for another 2 to 3 years, but they'd have the money. Or the Europeans provide direct financing through additional loans. They are not going to allow Ukraine to fail for lack of money. That I've heard from all the European frontline leaders. You hear it from the Brits as well, from the French, from the Germans. That's very clear. And of course, what this means is that the war continues. A lot more Russian soldiers die, a lot more Ukrainian civilians die, and frankly, the position that Ukraine ends up in is likely to be worse than what they are in presently. And so there is a strong reason to want this war to be over as soon as possible. But the fact that the Russians are not acting in good faith and the Americans are not aligned with either the Ukrainians or the Europeans in how to end the war ends up causing a lot more pain and damage for the people on the ground. I wish that weren't the case. I'd like to be more optimistic. I'd like to be wrong about this. I am a little bit more optimistic because Jared Kushner has joined Steve Witkoff now in the negotiations. He wanted nothing to do with the politics of this administration, just wanted to get back into business, had told me that, had told a bunch of people that many, many times at the beginning of the administration. He got back in on Gaza and had significant success in getting the hostages out and getting the Security Council to approve the Gaza ceasefire and peace deal. That was pretty remarkable. And so now he's gotten back into Russia-Ukraine, which frankly is more difficult to put together, but he's more capable, more experienced, and smarter than Witkoff is in engaging with the Russians. And that is certainly welcome. Final point I'll make here is that I have noticed that Marco Rubio has been more independent on the issues and more distant from Witkoff than I've seen senior members of this administration from one another on any other foreign policy issue. I mean, there's been some space between, let's say, the Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick, and Bessent, Secretary of Treasury, on some of the trade deals. You certainly saw some of that in the early days when Elon Musk was there with Doge, but he was never really full-time. And so, but here, you've got Rubio out there in his conversations with bipartisan groups of senators, as well as what he had to say in Miami, talking to the Ukrainians over the past hours, and talking to European leaders in Geneva. And his position has been significantly different in support for Ukrainian sovereignty, security guarantees, than what Witkoff has been saying to the Russians, as well as inside the administration. And that's interesting, shows a level of confidence on the part of Rubio, and shows a level of willingness of President Trump to allow the details to be managed by people that are more interested in the details than Trump is himself. And so, maybe there are a couple of small silver linings there, but overall, this does not appear to be heading in a positive direction. That's it for me. I'll talk to y'all real soon.